Recorded live from the heart of the Bakken, it's the Williston Works Podcast.
Welcome to the Williston Works Podcast, brought to you by the City of Williston. Williston Works brings you in-depth discussions with the entrepreneurs, small business owners, and investors who are getting it done in Williston, North Dakota. I'm your host, Shawn Wenko, Executive Director of the Williston Economic Development Office, and we are coming to you from the Williston Brewing Company here in Williston. What a great setting. And we're sitting here today with Steve Kemp. He is the owner of Wellspring Hydro. He actually owns a couple different businesses. We talked about Pro IT, but today we're talking a bit about Wellspring Hydro. Steve, good to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So let's have just a little bit of background about yourself. I mean, I know you're a Williston native, similar to myself. You've been here your whole life, but why don't you give the audience just a little background?
I grew up, born and raised in Williston. I landed on this earth in 1971, and my dad had moved here to start his dental practice back in the early 70s, and born and raised, never left. And Williston, I often describe it as a comfortable pair of shoes. Like you just get used to put them on every day, get up, get going, and it's just a good, easy place to live.
Well, and we talk about, the show is always about the entrepreneur and the developer and getting the message out there that Williston is a great place, for opportunity. And that's one thing, I've seen with your career throughout Williston is that's what I love about you, Steve, is you're always thinking, with these ideas. Yeah. And they start into businesses and you already have the successful business in the IT industry. Yep. And, a lot of people say, hey, I'm good, but you're still moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, in this case, this idea was born in the bathroom of all places. My wife hates it when I say that, but that's just how it is.
I remember when you told me that, and it is funny because we've sat across the table from some very important people throughout this whole process, and you always share that. But that's a true entrepreneur right there. But getting into Wellspring Hydro, what I really like about this project, and I'm going to have you explain it a bit, but what I really like about this project is you're seeing a huge shift with the oil and gas industry into more of a green movement. Yeah. And I talk a lot about carbon capturing, some of the byproduct that is out there. And it just helps everybody. It looks good for the oil and gas industry. It helps reduce their costs, increase their efficiencies. Absolutely. And this idea, when you brought it to the Economic Development Office several years ago, this thing had some legs, but let's explain to the podcast listeners what exactly is Wellspring Hydro.
Absolutely. And let's just start this way too, is I've had lots of ideas in my life, and what I've learned over the years from an entrepreneurial perspective is let the idea get the legs and run, and then you just try to keep up with it. Right. When it goes the other way, it's like taking a no-legged dog for a walk and you're trying to force this thing down the path. Right. That's when you got to stop and reevaluate. And with Wellspring Hydro, the idea really did spawn, and I came and visited with you, and it was the idea about extracting lithium from produced water. And we have all this produced water. It's the number one waste in the oil field. And the idea was, what can we do with the water?
And can you explain a bit, again, to the listeners, when we talk produced water, explain a bit what that is?
Yeah, and that's a great question, really, because for every barrel of oil that comes up out of the ground, you get about 1.1 barrels of water on average. And some wells produce more, some produce less, but ultimately it's about 1.1 barrels of water that come up. So they have the oil companies. The first thing they do is they have to separate the oil and the water and then dispose of the water. And like I said, it's the number one waste in the oil field. And it's creating kind of an issue because most of that water goes down and is disposed of in a sandstone formation called the Dakota Formation. And it's ultimately being overpressured because there's so much water being disposed of. And it creates hassles for the oil companies to drill through that overpressured zone. And so this is where the genesis of this idea comes from, is trying to find something to do with that produced water. And ultimately, it started out as lithium. How do we get lithium out of this water? Because the USGS had identified the water as being a potential source for lithium. And so that's really the beginning of the idea and where I came to you.
Yeah, and in lithium, we go back because we keep talking about, huge movement in electric cars, automation, things like that, and something's got to power these things.
Yeah.
And one of the main components is lithium batteries.
Absolutely.
If I'm correct in there. So, we're going to see a huge demand for this for mining lithium coming up.
Yep.
So, and that's when he showed up. Yeah, again, you talked to economic development. We talked about it. We worked with you on, I believe we did a buy down line of credit, some sorts, to kind of do some initial studies.
You bet.
And I think the thought process was there, but I think after the studies, that's when this thing really started running. Correct?
Absolutely. And again, the genesis of these ideas is you have to be prepared for it to morph into something completely different and wrap your head around. Don't ever fall in love with one particular component of your idea, because you never know what might happen. And so what happened in our case is you suggested we bring it to the EERC. We did. There was a tremendous amount of interest from the EERC, but what was unique about that is that they expect that you've got $1 million check in your pocket, which we didn't, and they quickly realized that, right?
And again, for the EERC is
it's a department at the University of North Dakota, and it's Energy and Environment Research Council, and they're a quasi-government entity, but they typically, industry will bring millions of dollars to them to solve a problem.
Yep.
And we didn't understand that fully before we approached them, but it was a beautiful scenario because in our presentation to the EERC, I had Dr. Steve Benson sitting on my right as I was telling my toilet story and about the genesis of the idea. And Dr. Benson recognized that we didn't have the money in our pocket. And he was suggesting that we go to the department heads of the College of Mining and Engineering at UND and have senior students do a project on our business, basically.
Well, and let's go back, because again, this is another great story of an entrepreneur. EERC, you go in there with your wife,
Yep.
and you're going in there to set up a meeting, and you guys are on vacation or something. You got shorts, flip-flops on, and these guys like this idea, and they're like, we're going to talk to the big guys right now, right?
Yeah, we Dr. John Narju and this is a big wig meeting. Like, this is all the people. We did not expect this. Like, literally, we called them on a Friday. Dr. Beth Kurz, or Beth Kurz, I'm not sure if she's a doctor. Anyway, Beth Kurz invites us down Monday. I mean, we called Friday. She says, "Can you be here Monday?" So we show up, and my wife forgot her dress clothes. And so she's got a t-shirt and shorts on. I bring dress clothes, but I forgot my dress shoes. So I've got dress clothes on and then flip-flops. And so we've got to look silly just walking in there. I mean, they're thinking, what in the world? Who are these people and why are they here? And so it's kind of there's lots of funny anecdotal things that happen along this journey, but that was definitely one of them.
It's all the makings of a movie down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. It's just it's great. So you were talking about, we started talking about lithium.
Mm-hmm.
You get to EERC, studies start happening.
Right.
Now there's this kind of realization that there's other applications that are more feasible to what you're doing. So when did we get to that phase?
Well, so EERC passes us to the College of Mining and Engineering at UND. Dr. Dan Lodahl and Dr. Mann, we meet with them, and they're excited about this project because it's a real world project, and they feel the senior engineering students are going to love this project. So they put together what they called the Dream Team, and they did a scoping study for us that lasted the entire school year. And the output of that at the end of this was it just wasn't economic to mine lithium from the water. But Dr. Lodahl had one of these light bulb moments at the presentation. The students are doing their presentation to this project that they've worked so hard on, and Dr. Lodahl at the conclusion of the presentation says, "There's some low hanging fruit here, and it's hydrochloric acid." And I'm like, I don't know where you get hydrochloric acid from all this, but please explain. And he says, "Steve, you have to do something with the salt. There's so much salt in this produced water. It's a ancient salty sea is basically that's been trapped underground forever." And one thing that's incredibly unique, and it's important to note with regards to Bakken produced water, is that it is incredibly saline. It's at near saturation. You can't fit another ounce of salt in this water without it precipitating out. And so he said, we need to do something with that. And there's a process called Chlor Alkali. And that process will take that sodium chloride, table salt, and split the sodium from the chlorine and you make hydrochloric acid with the chlorine, and you make caustic soda with the sodium. And so that was really where University of North Dakota passes us off to Bar Engineering to do a feasibility study at that point. And we get a grant from the North Dakota Industrial Commission along with the city of Williston to do this initial feasibility study. And this is where some magic starts to happen. And this idea is, completely morphed now into a Chlor Alkali plant.
Let's, for the listeners again, let's go back. So we're talking about hydrochloric acid. Mm-hmm. Okay. What is it? Why is it important to the oil and gas industry?
Absolutely. What's really beautiful about this whole project is that we're taking a waste stream from the oil and gas industry. We're taking the salt out, mining the salt, basically, splitting that sodium chloride into its constituent components. Hydrochloric acid comes out one side, and that's used for fracking. And so that is a critical component and used in fracking, used in saltwater disposal well cleanup, used in a lot of industrial processes, but those are the primary two. The caustic soda gets used in refineries, and it also gets used for scrubbing CO2, gets used for raising the pH in a frack job. It's got an incredible amount of utility in the industrial world. One of the most exciting things that caustic soda does is it's going to be used at Project Tundra. The Milton R. Young coal plant in Center, North Dakota, is in the process of doing Project Tundra, which will be the equivalent of taking 800,000 cars off the road the day they start up. And that's how much CO2 they're going to be removing. But they'll need 25 to 30 tons per day of caustic soda, which is about 15% of what we produce on a day-to-day average.
Well, and what's cool about this is that, okay, now you've got your business, mm-hmm. You're creating something. That creation now offers a local opportunity for other businesses that can buy it from you.
Right.
They can have it on site local. It's a lower cost. You ain't got to ship it in from anywhere else.
Exactly.
The state's benefiting from it. We're keeping it all local.
Right.
And so it's not just one business. There's multiple businesses that are going to affect. And at the same time, it still helps. Again, when I talk about the green movement, mm-hmm. I think there's a misconception out there with the oil and gas. When people look at the oil and gas industry, they think that it's just drilling and nobody cares. When they actually do care. And they're trying themselves to reduce the carbon footprint.
Absolutely.
And who better to be the leader on the green movement than the industry itself? And that's what they're doing. And that's what you're doing with these ideas.
100%.
Ideas as well. So, you get this, once we start doing the studies, now we're talking about building the plant.
Right.
We're getting into high dollar amounts here.
Yes, yeah.
And we're talking about equity coming in from other parts of the United States, equity coming in from the East Coast.
Right.
What's the discussion with those guys? You went out to the Eastern Seaboard.
Yep.
You met with a firm out there.
Yeah.
What did they think about this?
Everybody loves this idea. And really to expound on what you're saying with traditional oil and gas is going to be here for a while, folks. I mean, no matter how fast, you can't just flip a switch and convert overnight into a battery EV world. And so what we consider ourselves is kind of a bridge industry. So we are helping bridge that gap between traditional oil and gas, gasoline powered vehicles to an electric vehicle. And you need some business and industry that helps you get there in between. And so we are that bridge. So we go and we've been talking to private equity firms. We're talking to banks and everybody loves the story. But the problem is, and this is a challenge from a guy, an average Joe from Williston, North Dakota. This plant has a cost of around $170 million. And I've been looking in my pockets and I haven't put enough pennies together to make this happen on my own. But we have bootstrapped this thing and got it to the level we're at. And just to kind of come back full circle, UND does scoping study, BAR does feasibility study, and BAR's feasibility study is called FEL1, front end loaded engineering level 1, and that's feasibility. We have since hired an executive team. So Carla and I quickly recognized that we're not the people to run this business. We're not experienced enough in the oil and gas world. We're not experienced enough with $170 million operation. And so we recognize that we need a team, and actually we're mentored, and people are saying, look, you got to get a team together, Steve. So we have 2 executives from the oil and gas world and the petrochemical side of the oil and gas world. Then we have a Chlor Alkali expert named Norm Christensen. He Bar recommends we get a Chlor Alkali expert on as quickly as possible, because this is the complex $170 million question that we have to answer. And so Norm comes on. Mark Watson's our CEO. Matt Hurst is our COO. And so we form our team. And now we start to work with a company called Hargrove Engineers. And Hargrove is a core group of Chlor Alkali engineering specialists, and they now have completed what we call FEL2. They're in the process. I should say we've also partnered with a company called Veolia, and Veolia has done our pre-treatment analysis, which is a critical component to making all of this work, because this plant will be the first of its kind in the world, leveraging produced water from the oil field as a feedstock to a Chlor Alkali plant. No one has done this in the world, to our knowledge, and there's a reason. It's not easy, and most produced water doesn't have enough salt in it to make it feasible, where the Bakken brine does. And so we are just wrapping up FEL2 with the Veolia component. That should be done by the end of the month. But our next step is, starting in August, we'll start FEL3, which is the $1.5 million engineering question, and gets us within 10% plus or minus on our ultimate cost of the plant, and chooses all our vendors, lines up all the equipment. At the end of FEL3, we're ready to go and raise that $170 million. And back to your original question, I know this is a long spin, but what the processes we've gone through, these private equity firms, they'll say, Steve, by the time you get to Series A, which is where we're hoping to be right at the end of the year, about December timeframe, I'm not going to read your business plan. I'm going to read your supply agreements.
I mean to interrupt you. Tell the podcast listeners, Series A. What step is that?
Okay, Series A is the first series of big dollar fundraising. Yep. Everything up into to that point has been seed and development phases, and the development phase is where we're at right now, where we transitioned out of seed, and now we're moving into that development phase. And so Series A is what comes next, and that's where we raise the $170 million. And so that is, when we go to these private equity firms, one of which we've talked to, the Carlyle Group, they say, Steve, don't, I'm not going to read your business plan. So don't be heartbroken. And I'm not. The reason I'm not is that you've proved that business plan over these last 5-6 years of development of this business. If that business plan wasn't good, you wouldn't have made it to this point. What I am going to read are your supply agreements, your hydrochloric acid supply agreement with your vendor that's going to be buying it from you. I want to read that contract, make sure it's sound. I want to read the contract for your caustic soda for Project Tundra down in Center, North Dakota. Yep. I want to make sure those contracts are sound. So basically, by December, we should have all the contracts in place that for 100% of our product that we're going to be making. And that is really the equity to back the business for private equity to fund this thing, because it takes 2 years to build this thing. So people have to be willing to part with $170 million for 2 years with no return until that project is complete, or the construction is complete. So it's a unique ask.
Well, and the thing is, again, it shows the potential in Western North Dakota, because we're talking $170 million,
right?
And we're talking to big equity investment firms,
right?
They could put it anywhere,
right,
and probably get a quicker return. But I think they're seeing that there's potential here.
Absolutely.
So, just a couple more questions to close us out a bit. But we're talking about $170 million plan. What's the time frame? What are we looking at here?
So when we start FEL3 in August, we're done by the beginning of December. Beginning of December, we are knocking on doors and ringing phones because we're looking for that money at that point. To get this thing built. And so we should, assuming everything comes together, we should start construction in the spring of 22, and early spring, and earlier the better, and with a completion and startup of the plant right around second quarter probably of 24, hopefully, and maybe a little bit sooner, but I have a tendency to look through at the world with my rose-colored glasses, and I've been tempered because I'm saying 16, 18 months. Can we do that? Yes, it can happen, but the stars have to align perfectly. Likely 24 months it takes to get this thing done.
Well, I tell you what, it's a successful project, I believe, that has legs. And, you look at not just what you guys are doing with the water and stuff, but, there's this huge movement on kind of the green movement with oil and gas industry, like I said, and I've got entrepreneurs looking at what to do with flare gas that's out there, and other things like that. So if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, there's no such thing as a dumb idea. And we look at this, Steve, and everything started with a couple minutes on the toilet, and look where you're at today. So.
Exactly. Well, one thing to add on to this is kind of the icing on top of the cake with the story. We quickly knocked lithium out. But what's been interesting is as we come full circle, lithium's right back in there. And basically what's happened is enough time's gone by. We started in 2016. It's now 2021. And technology's been developed to recover this lithium from this water. And it's very efficient. Our partner in this is proved it out at 99.7% of the lithium can be pulled out of the water. So day one, we're going to be making hydrochloric acid, sodium hydroxide, calcium chloride, which is a new one, and lithium. And we couldn't be more excited about that. And we have in development, we have magnesium sitting out there. We're still partnered with the University of North Dakota, and Dr. Mann is working on a magnesium component. There's something that the Department of Defense is very interested in with regards to magnesium. So we feel like there's a great market for that as well. So,
well, all this from a couple minutes on the toilet.
Yeah.
I want to give you the last word, Steve. As an entrepreneur in the community in the region here, if other people are looking at investing or developing in Williston, what's a piece of advice you'd give them?
Stop down and talk to Shawn. Start there, and Shawn, you've done a great job in getting us pointed in all the right directions. And again, North Dakota is an incredible place, and specifically Western North Dakota, and I feel very near and dear to Williston, of course. We are open for business, as it's been stated, but it's a place where you can do business far easier than you can anywhere else. Obstacles are removed at every turn, and in an effort to get you in place, and especially when you have a good idea. And again, we've let this idea morph and turn into something that it didn't start out as. But don't be afraid to just let things happen, and if it goes the right way, run after it and chase it, but don't pull it like a no-legged dog down the street.
I couldn't agree with you more. Steve Kemp, everybody, owner of Wellspring Hydro. Steve, we really appreciate you having on the podcast today.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Shawn.
And also the listeners, thanks for listening to today's episode of Williston Works Podcast. It's brought to you by the City of Williston. Please like and subscribe for more interviews and content. And to learn more about Williston, North Dakota, visit citywilliston.com. I'm Shawn Wenko, Executive Director of the Economic Development Office here, and we will see you in the next podcast.